My name is Pablo Policzer, and I was born in 1964 in Santiago, Chile. In 1973, there was a coup, a military coup, where a government that was the socialist government that was elected in 1970 was overthrown and replaced with a military dictatorship led by Augusto Pinochet. At that time, shortly after that time, my father was taken prisoner, and he was a political prisoner for about a year and a half, and released finally in 1975. So we landed, my parents, with my two sisters and myself, landed in Canada on September 19th in 1975 as refugees. So we have been in Canada on and off since then. And we landed in Vancouver. And my experience, my family's experience at the very beginning was, I would say, mixed. On the one hand, it took a great deal of struggle on the part of my parents to get settled, to fit in, and to essentially find work in their field. My father is an architect. My mother was trained as an architect and worked as a city planner in Chile. And I remember those early years as years of some hardship, certainly financial hardship, and a great deal of struggle on the part of my parents. On the other hand, because I'm the oldest of my family, and so I would have been 10, almost 11 years old by the time that we arrived. So I was young enough to be able to integrate, I think, fairly smoothly into Canadian society. So I remember when we left Chile, there was a great deal of uncertainty. Where would we come to? Even the concept that people could think in a language other than Spanish was very bizarre to me. And I remember about a month after arriving, I was in an English as a second language class during my first year, realizing in the middle of recess in my elementary school that, talking with kids, I realized that I was all of a sudden thinking in English, and that was a complete revelation. So it was after that it was fairly easy to learn the language and to really integrate. And I have to say that the message that my family and many other Chileans who arrived at that time, certainly in Vancouver, received from Canadian society was, welcome, you're one of us. And that made a huge difference. We felt certainly welcomed, and felt that we were provided with a great deal of help, for example, through English lessons and so on. My parents, they worked very hard to be able to find work in their professions, which they did. My mother went to school, to UBC, where she did a master's degree in urban planning, and was able to find work in the late 70s as an urban planner, as a city planner in Vancouver. And I'm very grateful to Canadian society for that kind of openness, that kind of acceptance, and that kind of welcome. And I have been very concerned in recent years when there has been a debate over how to welcome or even whether to welcome Syrian refugees, the largest refugee crisis since the Second World War, where I have heard messages of fear, even of hate, that I think are just fundamentally wrong, and they're not the kinds of message that we heard when we arrived. Now, having said that, I know that so my experience as a refugee was not necessarily the same that a number of other Chileans had, and I've seen stories and I've read stories in the newspaper about how people, for example, in Toronto, some groups protested the arrival of Chilean refugees and carried around placards saying, "Marxists, go home," and we don't want these Marxists, these socialists here. So I do know that there were some protests at the time, but speaking just from personal experience, what I certainly lived through and felt was a very different kind of message, and it was very easy for us to, it wasn't easy, but it was very possible for us to integrate, and certainly we felt a great deal of openness and welcome.